The alien warlord grinned as the battered human was dragged into the war chamber. He was the last survivor of his unit, a trophy to be mocked before his execution. Or so they thought. General Voth, Supreme Commander of the Zervax Dominion, stood before the assembled high-ranking officers of his fleet. The war chamber, an enormous hall of gleaming obsidian metal, was filled with the echoing laughter of the Zervax elite. Towering figures with elongated skulls and razor-thin eyes, they exuded an aura of superiority, their every motion precise and calculated. The captured human, however, looked unimpressed. His uniform was torn, dried blood crusting the edges of his sleeves. Deep bruises colored his face, and yet, he stood upright, defiant. His hands were bound behind his back with shimmering grav-binders, and 2 Zervax guards flanked him, weapons aimed at his ribs. A lesser species should have been trembling. Instead, the human smirked. Voth narrowed his yellow eyes, stepping closer. "You do not fear death, human?" The officers chuckled among themselves. The question was a formality, the inevitable outcome of all prisoners was the same. And yet, something about this man unsettled them. The human rolled his shoulders slightly, as if testing his restraints. "You think I'm afraid?" he asked, tilting his head. "That's cute." A murmur rippled through the chamber. One of the Zervax nobles sneered. "You stand before the might of the Zervax Dominion, human. Your kind is weak, your primitive weapons, your fragile bodies, your laughable attempts at resistance." Voth smirked, playing along. "Yes. I have seen many of your kind break before us. Some begged for their lives. Others screamed. But you mock us?" The human let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "I'm just trying to decide if I should tell you, or let you figure it out yourselves." "Tell us what?" Voth demanded, his amusement slipping. The human's smirk widened. His eyes flicked toward the high-ranking officers around him, Zervax generals, war strategists, nobles who had never set foot on a battlefield. Arrogance oozed from their very presence. Then, finally, he spoke. "You really don't know what you've done, do you?" The laughter in the chamber faltered. Voth's expression darkened. "Explain yourself." The human exhaled, as if considering his words carefully. Then, with a slow, deliberate grin, he leaned forward and whispered. "You just made the biggest mistake in Zervax history." Silence fell over the room. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, the Zervax felt something unfamiliar, doubt. A hush fell over the war chamber, the laughter now replaced by uneasy glances. The human's words had struck a nerve, not because of what he had said, but because of how he had said it. There was no fear in his voice. No desperation. Only quiet confidence. General Voth's yellow eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that, human?" The prisoner straightened, despite the bruises on his body. "Oh, it's simple," he said, his voice almost conversational. "You think you've won. You think you've crushed us. But what you don't realize is, you've just set something in motion that you can't stop." The Zervax officers exchanged uneasy glances. Voth, however, merely smirked. "You are one soldier. Alone. Your people are scattered, your fleets are burning, your colonies abandoned. What could possibly be coming for us?" The human's smile didn't waver. "You don't understand humanity, do you?" He sighed, as if speaking to a child. "See, when we take a hit, we don't crumble. We don't surrender. We don't scatter like prey." His eyes darkened. "We unite. And when that happens, we become something else entirely. Something that you should have never provoked." Voth's expression remained unimpressed, but something about the human's tone was beginning to crawl under his skin. He had seen fear in the eyes of many prisoners. Pleading. Bargaining. Even hatred. But never this, certainty. Bold words for a dead man, one of the Zervax officers sneered. Your species is outmatched in every way. You can't possibly believe that humanity poses a threat to the Dominion. The human gave a slow, knowing grin. You tell me. He tilted his head slightly, and the officers instinctively followed his gaze, to the massive viewport overlooking the Zervax fleet. Dozens of capital ships floated above the planet, their hulls shimmering under the twin moons. The sight was meant to intimidate him. But the human's smirk only grew. Voth frowned. What was he so confident about? Then, a sudden beeping noise echoed through the chamber. A Zervax officer turned toward the control panel embedded in his wrist, his reptilian fingers tapping swiftly. His already pale face drained of color. General, he said hesitantly, our long-range scanners have detected something unusual. Voth's eyes snapped toward him. Unusual how? The officer swallowed. We're picking up an incoming warp signature. A large one. A hush fell over the room. Voth's gaze darted back to the human, who was now watching him closely. Impossible, another Zervax officer muttered. No human ships should be capable of breaching our territory undetected. Yet, the readings were undeniable. The Zervax fleet had complete control over this sector, their planetary defenses locked in place. Nothing should have been able to approach without setting off early warning systems. And yet, something was coming. Voth turned back to the human, who now stood completely still, his smirk fading into something colder. I told you, he said softly. You don't understand what you've done. The beeping grew more frantic. The Zervax officer's voice shook. General. It's a human fleet. They've found us. A thick silence hung over the war chamber. The once smug Zervax officers were now exchanging nervous glances, their scales paling in unease. Only moments ago, they had laughed at their human prisoner, mocking him as weak, as insignificant. Now, their fleet sensors screamed with incoming human warships. General Voth's claws tightened against the edge of the war table, his jaw clenching. This is a bluff, he snarled. Humanity has no ships left capable of launching an assault of this scale. The officer manning the sensor display gulped. Sir, we have visual confirmation. They're already within range. With a flick of his claw, Voth activated the holographic projection in the center of the room. A three-dimensional image of Zervax space flickered to life, filled with the standard formation of their patrol fleet, but now, dozens of unfamiliar signals had appeared at its edges. A cold dread crept down his spine. He had underestimated them. The human prisoner, still bound, took a single step forward. Though his hands were shackled, his expression held no fear, only quiet amusement. You should have listened, he murmured. Voth whipped around, baring his fangs. What are they? A desperate last stand? A scattered fleet looking for vengeance? The human tilted his head, as if considering. No, he said simply. They're a message. Suddenly, the war chamber's red alert klaxons blared. A synthetic voice echoed over the intercom in sharp Zervax tones. Unidentified vessels have locked weapons. Shield impact imminent. A second later, the entire station shook. The floor lurched beneath their feet as explosions erupted outside, rocking the massive Zervax capital station. The officers stumbled, some crashing into control panels as emergency lights bathed the room in crimson. Return fire. Voth bellowed. Scramble the fleet. Do not let them. Before he could finish, the chamber doors blasted open. Smoke and sparks filled the air as armored figures stormed in, humans. But not just soldiers. These warriors moved with precision, their gear sleek, their weapons humming with suppressed energy. They weren't reckless. They weren't untrained rebels. They were special forces. The Zervax guards barely had time to raise their weapons before they were struck down in clean, efficient bursts of energy fire. One by one, they collapsed. The human prisoner didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly stepped forward as one of the armored soldiers approached, his rifle still smoking from the shot. "Lieutenant," the soldier greeted, lowering his weapon. "You good?" The prisoner smirked. "Took you long enough." The soldier tapped his helmet. "We had to make an entrance." Voth stared in disbelief. "A rescue operation? Inside Zervax-controlled space? This was suicide. It was impossible." Yet, as his station shook from another impact, and as the sensors confirmed even more human ships warping into the sector, Voth realized something chilling. This wasn't an act of desperation. It was a coordinated attack. A full-scale retaliation. And the worst part? The humans weren't here just to escape. They were here to send a message. The Zervax war chamber, once a place of control and confidence, had become a scene of utter chaos. Sirens blared. Officers shouted conflicting orders. The massive viewscreen displayed carnage, Zervax warships exploding one by one, their sleek hulls shattered by precise human strikes. General Voth clutched the edges of the war table, his claws digging into the surface. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. How had this happened? The humans weren't supposed to have the capability to launch an offensive this deep into Zervax space. Their forces should have been crippled. Their fleets scattered. And yet, there they were. Ships unlike anything the Zervax had encountered before. Their vessels moved in tight formations, their energy signatures barely visible until they were already within striking distance. Their attacks weren't random, they were surgical, precise, and devastating. Voth's eyes flickered toward the human prisoner, no, the infiltrator, who now stood confidently among his newly arrived comrades. The soldier who had led the rescue mission turned toward him. His armor was still glistening with the glow of spent plasma rounds. "You really thought we were broken, didn't you?" he said, tilting his head slightly. Voth bared his fangs. "You were supposed to be weak." The prisoner smirked. "We let you believe that." A sinking feeling settled in Voth's gut. He turned toward the strategy display, trying to find a way out. Zervax warships were still active, but they were being funneled into a kill zone. Every attempt to retreat only led them deeper into an invisible trap. "Sir," one of his officers shrieked. "We're being jammed. They're overriding our communications." On the screen, human ships deployed strange devices, electronic warfare platforms that latched onto Zervax systems, hijacking their transmissions. One by one, the Zervax fleet lost control of their own ships. Voth's heart pounded. Impossible. The infiltrator gave a slow, knowing nod. "Oh, it's very possible." With a single motion, the human soldier lifted his wrist device and activated a frequency. A new voice crackled to life over the chamber's speakers. A human voice. "This is Fleet Admiral Kovac of the United Earth Coalition." The entire room froze. "We gave you every opportunity to negotiate," the voice continued, calm yet commanding. "We warned you about underestimating us. But you laughed. You mocked us. You thought we were too weak to fight back." The transmission crackled slightly, but when it resumed, the next words sent a chill through every Zervax officer present. "You're not just losing a battle, General. You've already lost the war." At that moment, the station lurched violently. A direct impact. Voth stumbled, gripping the table for balance. His officers were shouting. The lights flickered. One of the defense corridors had been breached. The human infiltrator turned toward him, stepping closer. "You're not getting out of this one, General," he said softly. Voth growled, rage and desperation flaring inside him. "You think this is over? His claws flexed, his muscles tensing. "I'll rip the truth out of you myself." The infiltrator only smiled. "You're welcome to try." The alarms intensified. The trap had closed. And for the first time in his long, brutal career, General Voth felt fear. The last remnants of the Zervax fleet were scattered across the vast expanse of space, their once proud ships now floating derelict in the aftermath of the human assault. The station was in ruins, crumbling beneath the weight of its own failure. Sirens wailed in the background, as explosions and rupturing hulls echoed through the corridors. General Voth's mind raced. The humans had done the impossible. He had underestimated them, yes, but what truly tormented him now was the sheer audacity of their strategy. Their infiltration had been swift, their retaliation devastating. But it wasn't just their weapons or their technology that had broken the Zervax, it was their resolve, their unrelenting will to fight. Standing amidst the devastation in the war chamber, Voth stared out at the void through the cracked viewscreen. He could still hear the human voice, Fleet Admiral Kovac's words ringing in his ears, "You've already lost the war." But even as he felt his grip on control slipping away, his mind fixated on one question: why? Why had the humans come for them? The door to the chamber slid open, and the human infiltrator, the one who had led the charge, entered without hesitation. Voth turned to face him. "What do you want from us?" His voice was low, filled with the remnants of defiance. The human stepped closer, his posture unwavering. "We didn't come for vengeance, General." He spoke evenly, his words almost too calm. "We came because you gave us no choice. We warned you, again and again. Your arrogance, your belief that you could dominate the galaxy, that is why we came." Voth's claws clenched, and his voice grew sharper. "Then why not just destroy us? Why leave us alive?" The human's gaze softened for a moment, and there was a glimmer of something Voth couldn't place. "Because, General, your people aren't beyond saving." Voth's heart skipped a beat. "Saving? What are you talking about? We've fought side by side with beings far more dangerous than you," the human continued, his eyes meeting Voth's. "And we've always found a way to build something better. Something lasting. We wanted to offer you a chance to be part of that." The room fell silent as the weight of the words settled in. Voth's mind reeled. A chance? To join the humans? To admit defeat? Why would we ever want to be part of your empire? Voth snarled. The human's gaze grew harder, colder. "It's not about empire. It's about evolution, about survival. You've lost everything because you thought power was the answer. But strength lies in something far more important. Unity." Voth shook his head, refusing to believe it. Unity? It was a word he had never considered. His people had thrived on conquest, on tearing others down. But this human, standing before him, had defeated him without even needing to fire a shot. "What are you offering, then?" Voth demanded. "Peace?" The human nodded. "Peace, yes. But not for the weak." His voice grew more resolute. "For those who can look beyond their pride, beyond their past, and see the future." Voth fell silent, the weight of the situation settling in. The war was over. The Zervax were defeated. Their once mighty fleet was gone. And yet, there was something about the human's words that resonated deep within him. "Make no mistake," the human continued, his voice now full of quiet power, "we're not asking for your submission. We're offering you the chance to fight with us, to build something greater than what you've destroyed. But that choice is yours." The silence stretched on as Voth pondered his next words. He could feel the eyes of his people on him, his officers waiting for a decision. This was his final chance to act, to make a choice that would define the future of his species. For the first time in his life, Voth's pride seemed like nothing more than a burden. The human waited. And then, finally, Voth spoke, his voice trembling with a mix of fear, regret, and reluctant hope. I choose peace. The decision had been made. General Voth, once the proud leader of the Zervax, now found himself in a new position, a refugee of his own making, standing at the crossroads between his past of conquest and a future he had never imagined. He had chosen peace, yes, but what did that really mean for his people? Could they change? Could they adapt? In the days following Voth's decision, the atmosphere aboard the remaining Zervax vessels shifted. The once mighty fleet, which had terrorized entire star systems, now floated aimlessly through space, its warriors demoralized and broken. The alien ships were no longer the embodiment of power, they were merely remnants of a failed dream. But amidst the quiet, there was a growing undercurrent of hope. The humans, led by Fleet Admiral Kovac, had kept their word. They hadn't destroyed the Zervax, instead, they had extended a hand to help them rebuild. The humans' offer of peace was not some empty gesture, it was a genuine attempt to forge something meaningful from the ruins of a conflict that had already cost too many lives. Voth, now stripped of his previous arrogance, wandered the corridors of his flagship, reflecting on the humans' words. Unity. Survival. For the first time, he understood their meaning. They weren't just about survival in the physical sense. No, these humans were talking about the survival of ideas, of cultures, of species that could put their differences aside and work together. He had been wrong, terribly wrong, in thinking that the universe was a place where only the strong thrived. The humans had proved that strength didn't lie in dominance. It was in compassion, in connection. But change was never easy. The Zervax military leaders, those who had survived the war, were not so easily swayed. Many still resented the decision Voth had made. They believed he had abandoned their legacy, betrayed their very nature as conquerors. They whispered behind his back, questioning his loyalty to their cause, his commitment to the Zervax way. Voth had expected this resistance. Change, especially in such a deeply entrenched culture, wasn't something that could happen overnight. But even as doubts crept in, he knew he had to press on. He had to lead his people into this new era, even if it meant doing so against their will. The future of the Zervax, as bleak as it seemed, was now in his hands. One evening, in the quiet of his personal quarters, Voth stood before a holographic display. The image showed the human fleet, their ships sleek and efficient, a sharp contrast to the battle-scarred remnants of his own. But there was something else, something more profound, the humans were working together. Admiral Kovac had invited Voth to visit their command center, to meet with human leaders, scientists, and diplomats. It wasn't just about the future of the Zervax, it was about the future of the galaxy. The humans had offered him a place at their table, a chance to become part of something larger than himself. Voth's claws twitched in nervous anticipation. Could they really change? Could the Zervax ever shed their violent past? With a deep breath, he activated the comm system and sent a message to the human fleet. Admiral Kovac. I accept your invitation. It is time I faced what my people truly need. I will come. General Voth. The reply came quickly, we'll be waiting, General. Together, we'll rebuild. Together, we'll thrive. The next day, General Voth and his closest advisors boarded one of the remaining Zervax ships, prepared to journey to the human fleet. The atmosphere among his people was tense, uncertain. Would they truly follow him? Would they embrace this radical new future? As Voth gazed out of the view screen, he felt the weight of his decision more keenly than ever. He wasn't sure what awaited him or his people. But for the first time, he allowed himself to hope. He realized that perhaps peace wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something far greater. As the ship left the ruins of the Zervax station behind, he couldn't help but think of his own journey. From pride and arrogance to humility and hope, he had traveled a great distance. And this was only the beginning. General Voth's ship docked with the human fleet, the sleek designs of the Zervax ships contrasting sharply with the pristine, orderly appearance of the human vessels. As Voth stepped onto the command deck, he felt the weight of history upon him. This wasn't just another mission. This was the future of his people, and the last chance to prove that they could evolve, that they could change. Admiral Kovac was there to greet him. His smile was warm but cautious, as if both sides understood that this was a pivotal moment. The crew, too, watched them carefully, human and Zervax alike, observing the first step toward unity. "We are ready, General," Kovac said, offering a firm handshake. "This isn't just about survival. It's about something much greater. A future where all of us, humans, Zervax, and every race in the galaxy, can thrive." Voth nodded, his mind still adjusting to this new paradigm. The same words he had once dismissed as weak now held profound meaning. Together, we can thrive. As they entered the command room, Voth was introduced to a group of human leaders, scientists, diplomats, and military commanders. For the first time, Voth wasn't just a general at the head of an army. He was a member of a community. He was equal, a sentiment he had never truly felt before. The discussions that followed were lengthy and intense. But, for once, Voth wasn't met with mockery or disdain. The humans treated him as a peer, an ally, and despite his previous reputation, he began to realize that he was capable of more than just war. His people, the Zervax, could contribute far more to the galaxy than the legacy of destruction they had built for themselves. In the coming days, the Zervax were integrated into the human fleet's operations. At first, it was a difficult transition. The Zervax warriors, trained for combat, struggled to fit into roles of diplomacy, research, and peaceful exploration. There were mistakes, misunderstandings, and moments of tension, but each time, the humans extended a hand of forgiveness and understanding. Slowly, the Zervax began to change. They started to value peace, to value unity over division. It wasn't an easy process, but it was a process rooted in the belief that no species was beyond redemption. Voth, who had once been so steadfast in his pride, now began to see the fruits of his labor, a crew of soldiers, once feared and hated, now learning the art of cooperation, empathy, and rebuilding. Months passed, and the once volatile relationship between the Zervax and humans became something stronger than mere coexistence. The two species, once on opposite ends of a devastating conflict, now worked together, side by side, in research labs, on diplomatic missions, and exploring the farthest reaches of space. They shared knowledge, resources, and dreams of a better future.